Hey everybody, and welcome back to the channel. You are checking out a Magicka Nightblade solo PVE build. That's right, it's another solo build. This one updated for the Elsweyr chapter. Now I know there's been an insane amount of changes to the Nightblade class this patch. I also know some of you guys are not too happy about it, but here's the thing. Some of these changes are actually a buff when you think about a solo build. I'm talking about more Magicka sustain, also a lot stronger damage mitigation. So if you're interested in soloing world bosses, soloing dungeons, even vet dungeons if you want, then the Magicka Nightblade is actually stronger than ever. So as usual, we'll go over the stats, some gear options, skills, champion points, and more coming up next. Usual disclaimer, I'm not completely min-max on this build yet. I don't have my Undaunted max, for example. I don't have all gold gear. If you do those, your stats will definitely get higher. So just think of this kind of as a baseline, and you can take it from there. Also keep in mind, this is a solo build. This is not a pure DPS build, so your stats will be quite different. We have to think about things like survivability, tanking, healing, all that good stuff. So 36.5k max Magicka, 18k max health, 12k stamina. Our Magicka, is this guy gonna make it? He made it, okay. Magicka recovery, 1600 mag recovery there is plenty. About 700 stamina recovery is also good. Our buffed spell damage coming in at 2200. We do have a Berserker glyph though, so you'll be closer to 2700 spell damage there. 62% spell critical is looking pretty good, and this can go higher depending on your Mundus stone, so we'll talk about that in a little bit. Our resistances actually do go up with our shadow abilities. We get our Major Ward, Major Resolve going, so 23,000 spell resist, about 21,000 physical resist. This is a light armor build, by the way, so that's pretty good. And on top of that, we also have a flat 15% damage mitigation, which I will talk about in a little bit. So I have some nice well-rounded stats for solo. 64 points into max Magicka as usual. I am using the Witch Mother's Potent Brew. This did get slightly nerfed in the Elsweyr patch, but I think it's still worth running on some Magicka builds for that extra Magicka recovery. I'm using a combination of Mundus stones here. Right now I'm running the Lover and the Lady. So Lover Mundus is giving us extra spell penetration, about 3,500 there. And then Lady is giving us an extra 3,500 spell and physical resist. So the combination of these two is what I recommend for soloing, especially if you're a newer player or you're taking on some more challenging content for this first time. This gives you a nice combination of damage, which is the Lover Mundus, and defense from the Lady. Now, if you're thinking about group content, maybe a group DPS, vet dungeon, even a normal trial, you can swap these out for more DPS-oriented Mundus stones. I would recommend the Thief and the Shadow in that case. So you have some flexibility there, which is nice. I'm a vampire. I do recommend that still for the extra Magicka and stamina recovery. The Undeath Pass is also nice. For our potions, you can use Essence of Spell Power. You can also use just the plain Magicka trash potions. Because we have both of our buffs, we have our major crit bonus and major spell power bonus on this build. So that is a nice way to save some money. You can just use the normal Magicka potions. And then finally for our race here, I do highly recommend the Breton race for a couple reasons. You get the nice max Magicka bonus, which is really strong. 2,000 max Magicka there. You get Magicka recovery and spell resistance, which is really nice. But this is the really good bonus here, the last one. Magicka Mastery reduces the Magicka cost of your abilities by 7%. This is huge when you're playing solo, guys. You're not going to have shards or orbs available to help you sustain. So I think the Breton is flat out the best. I did try this build on one of my older tunes, which is a Argonian, and the sustain just wasn't happening. So I do recommend Breton for the sustain. So let's jump right into the gear next. You probably guessed my first set here. I decided to go with Twiceborn Star for this solo build. So this is a 9 trait crafted set, comes from Craglorn. And the bonuses here, you get max health, max stamina, max magicka. So that's a nice bit of well-rounded stats. I especially wanted the max health here because Bretons don't have any max health bonus. So this is actually really helpful when soloing. And then for the 5-piece bonus here, we can actually have 2 Mundus Stone bonuses at the same time. So I really like that on this solo Magblade build. It just makes the build so flexible, you guys. Like I showed you in the stats, if you're just new and you're kind of trying things out, or you're trying out a new dungeon, kind of soloing around, get the Lady Mundus for more defense, get Lover for more penetration, and that's going to be really strong. And then you can just swap in things from there. If you decide to go with groups for a little bit or trials, swap in some damaging Munduses, Thief Mundus, Shadow Mundus. It's really easy to customize your build based on what you want to do with it. So this is just a great baseline set for any Magicka Nightblade build. So I am using this on my weapons here. I have a sharpened Inferno Staff on the front bar. Sharpened because I am playing solo for the most part, and I need that extra penetration. With light armor passives, with Lover Mundus, with champion points, with sharpened, we are not quite at pen cap, more like 15,000 penetration, but it's still really strong. If you want to make this a pure DPS or group build, I would recommend Nirnhoned as the trait for that main hand. Back bar, I've got another Twiceborn Star Inferno Staff. This time I'm running Infused, and that is with a Hardening Enchant. So the Hardening Enchant gives you a damage shield. I've got about a 5k damage shield every 5 seconds. And then this is just a really easy way to stay alive in some tougher content. You'll always have your Wall of Elements up on the back bar, so you'll always have a damage shield coming from that enchant. So it's really helpful. You can choose to run your Berserker Glyph on the back bar. You'll get higher uptime on your spell damage boost. That's what I would recommend if you're not soloing super hard content. But the way I have it is I have my Berserker Glyph front bar and then Hardening Enchant on the back bar. So our weapons count for 2 pieces. I am then using the chest here. I went with a heavy infused chest. This just gives us a little bit of extra defense as well as health from our heavy armor passives. Infused with a tri-stat enchant gives you the most stats possible, so that's definitely what you want. And then I just have a waist here, Divines, and then gloves, Divines, max magicka on those pieces. For our next 5-piece set, I went with the Mother Sorrow set. This gives you max magicka for the 2-piece, and then tons of spell critical for the rest of the set. So this is a really good set to run on Magicka Nightblade, who functions well with high crit. That's because we already have increased crit damage from some of our passives as a Nightblade. Like I said, you can choose to go Thief Mundus. With this set, you'll get close to 75-80% crit on the build, and then if you're running Shadow on top of that, your damage will just go through the roof. So overall, this is just a really nice damage-oriented set. It is light armor. I did want to be a light armor build for this setup, and it gives us really great damage, as well as healing. In case you aren't familiar with the Nightblade, a lot of our damaging skills heal us based on how much damage we did. So if we get a nice juicy crit, Swallow Soul, that's going to heal us for even more. So that's something to keep in mind when you're building a Magicka Nightblade. So I have just 2 pieces on the body here. I've got another infused piece, which would be ideal. Infused legs here with a tri-stat enchant, gives you lots of stats. Divines on the boots, and then just 3 pieces of jewelry, all arcane, all spell damage. Last but not least, our monster set. By far my favorite monster set for solo is going to be Iceheart. Iceheart gives you more spell crit, which is really good on this build. And then for our 2-piece here, when we deal critical damage, which we have tons of critical, so this is going to happen off cooldown, we get a nice almost 10k damage shield for 6 seconds, as well as some AoE frost damage. So this is really great for helping you to stay alive because it's another damage shield that just goes off without you having to think. Every 6 seconds, you're going to be able to absorb a nice bit of damage and let your healing over time keep you alive. So I have this on my head and shoulders. Ideally, you would want divines and you would want light armor pieces on both of these. Right now, I'm doing 5 light, 2 heavy. That's giving me a nice extra bit of health. Also, I don't have my Undaunted passives anyway, so I'm not losing out too much. If you're max level Undaunted, definitely think about running 5-1-1, heavy chest, and a medium monster piece, or heavy chest and medium legs would be the best way to go there. So I think that covers the gear. Let's go ahead and jump into the skills. Next, starting with our front bar skills, we've got Impale first up. This is our Execute, does 300% more damage to enemies that fall below 25% health. If this happens to crit, it just hits like a truck. So definitely want an Execute on your front bar for finishing off some of those higher health bosses. Next up, Sap Essence. This is our AoE damage and heal. So it gives us a flat heal and then scales up 20% more for each enemy hit. This also gives us the Major Sorcery buff, which is our 20% spell damage buff. So using this, it's absolutely great for AoE trash pulls, big fights. You'll drop your ground-based AoEs, and then you can just spam Sap Essence for some extra healing. You can even do this while holding block to get just tons of health rolling in. But then that Major Sorcery lets you run basic Magicka potions if you want. You can save your money on those. So I really like this skill. Next up, I'm using Inner Light for the extra max Magicka and the Major Prophecy buff. That is our spell crit. Gives us an extra 10% spell crit on the build. So again, you can run this through potions if you want. And if you do that, you can actually think of this as a flex spot and run some other things here. But just for simplicity and, pretty easy fights, I will run Inner Light on the front bar for the extra max Magicka and the spell crit. Now, if you are facing something a little bit more difficult, what you can put here in place of Inner Light is actually Dark Cloak, the heal. Now, the heal is not that great anymore. It did get reduced a bit, but this tooltip does scale up with our % healing done. It can crit as well, so you'll get 2 to 3k heals per second on this, which is not terrible. And then you also get the Minor Protection buff when this is active. So Minor Protection for 8 seconds reduces your damage done by 8%. So I will slot this for bosses that are hitting me really hard. This extra heal can just kind of save your life. And the Minor Protection is helpful as well for rolling off some of that big damage. Next up, we got Swallow Soul. This does a decent amount of magic damage. Heals us for 38% of the damage every 2 seconds. That's what I mentioned. If you get a nice big juicy crit, you can just let that roll for 10 seconds and you'll get the most healing possible out of this skill. Darkshade. Now, Darkshade got some buffs in the Elsweyr chapter. It does more damage now. It does both single target and AoE damage. And why I run this really is the Minor Maim that it does. So Minor Maim reduces enemy damage by 15% for 4 seconds. And for a boss fight, that is huge. You really want Minor Maim on any kind of solo build if you're fighting world bosses, vet dungeon bosses, because that extra 15% really helps. It really helps you stay alive. The great thing about this, though, is it's not just single target Maim, it's actually AoE Maim. This little Nightblade will spawn and he'll do like a whirlwind attack, and he'll put Minor Maim on everything around you. So not only is it good for boss fights, but definitely pop that in a trash pull as you're clearing through a dungeon as well. I'll pop that first. It'll do the little spin to win deal, and everything will be debuffed. Soul Harvest. Nothing really new happened with Soul Harvest. Didn't get changed unlike Incap. But this has always been great for solo builds because you get the increased damage, 20% increased damage for 6 seconds. So you can get some nice burst on that. And then the passive ability here, while slotted, anytime you kill an enemy, you gain 10 ultimate. So think about if you have, let's say, 10 to 12 enemies that you kill, you will be killing them most likely on your front bar with Sap Essence after you drop your AoEs, and you'll get all that ultimate back, 100, 120, 150 ultimate. You'll get all of that back every trash pull as long as you finish it on your front bar. So that's something that you have to learn to do. All right, let's swap to the back bar. We've got Blockade of Fire. This is our AoE ground-based. Gives us a nice flame damage every 1 second. Burning enemies take 20% more damage. And this is on our infused back bar, so we're getting that infused glyph to proc every 5 seconds for our damage shield. So this skill is actually really critical. Not only does it do damage, but it helps you stay alive if you're running the damage shield enchant. So make sure you slam that down first and just keep it active 100% of the time. It's good for 8 seconds. Make sure you refresh that every 8 seconds. Now we've got Twisting Path also. This is another ground-based AoE. Gives us major expedition in the path. Does good damage, similar to Wall of Fire. It is not as critical though as Blockade because we talked about that damage shield enchant. So if you're low on Magicka, you can drop this. It's just giving you a little bit extra damage. So Debilitate, this is going to be our single target damage over time. Does really good damage over 10 seconds. Also does a snare, which really isn't that important for PvE. And when I talked about in the intro, more sustain on the Magicka Nightblade, this is it. This got buffed with minor Magicka Steel. So it gives you 300 Magicka every 1 second as long as your Debilitate is on the target. So yes, Crippling Grasp, that morph does do more damage up front, but for soloing, where sustain is really one of your main issues, definitely run this morph instead. The extra 300 Magicka every 1 second, it's basically like 600 Magicka recovery on your stat sheet. So this, I really do like how this buff worked out. Speaking of sustain, we have Siphoning Attacks. This is just a really low cost buff that gives you nice sustain. It gives you healing and restores Magicka for 20 seconds every time you light or heavy attack. So again, for soloing, you want to focus on sustain. Even with the Breton, if you don't run the skill, you will have trouble. So I definitely recommend this. This, along with our Debilitate, really makes the build work as far as sustaining without problems. So let's talk about Merciless Resolve next. This skill got completely reworked. Used to give Minor Berserk, doesn't give you Minor Berserk anymore. But what this did do is it gives you more damage mitigation. So this effect stacks up to 5 times, and for each stack you get 3% damage reduction. So 3% times 5 stacks, we're looking at 15% overall damage reduction, basically for doing something that you would do anyways. You should be light attacking after every skill. Now you actually get something for it. You get 15% at max stacks. Now also at 5 stacks, you get the Spectral Bow proc. Gives you a good bit of Magicka damage and healing. But this is now a choice that you make, because when you fire the bow, you lose your 5 stacks and you lose your 15% damage mitigation. So this adds kind of a new twist to survivability for the Magicka Nightblade. You have to decide, do I want to hold on to my bow stacks and keep my 15%? Or do I want to fire off the bow, get a little bit of burst damage, and then build up my stacks again? Now that is kind of nice because you get to decide how you play your build. If you're running a dungeon for the first time, if you're soloing like a really hard world boss, you might just want to hang on to those 5 stacks. Because the nice thing about it is once you get to 5, your damage mitigation stays on your character. You'll get the buff icon there with a little 5 on it, and it just stays. It doesn't go away even after your Merciless wears off. So it's up to you. You can decide to keep it, you can decide to use it, and then just build it up again. But I definitely recommend this skill. Even though we did lose the Minor Berserk, the extra damage mitigation is nice for this kind of build. All right, for our backbar ultimate, one of my favorites in the game, Soul Tether, gives us a good bit of AoE damage and healing. Definitely keeps you alive in big pulls, big trash mob situations, but why I really like it, let's see, where is it? Stunning them for 4 seconds. So it is a 4-second stun on top of the damage and on top of the healing back that you get. So even in vet dungeons, what you can do is drop your Twisting Path, drop your Blockade, Ultimate, that'll give you a 4-second stun, and then just bar swap Sap Essence, and you'll basically annihilate any pack of mobs. It just does lots of damage. The stun helps you survive, and then you get all this healing rolling in. And again, since you're killing enemies on your front bar, you'll be getting all that ultimate in from Soul Harvest. Having that slot on your front bar, you'll get 10 ultimate back per kill. It's just a great way to clear through a dungeon. It's really an effective playstyle. So let's quickly talk about passives. Passives are super important, especially on a Magicka Nightblade where you get certain bonuses for having specific skills slotted. So if you're a newer player, this is going to be really helpful in understanding why I slot certain abilities on certain bars. Now you really have to understand the Nightblade passives when you're setting up your build. So Assassination, you'll want all of these. Master Assassin gives you extra spell damage while invisible. We're not using that. Executioner is helpful because it's going to give you almost 2k Magicka back when you execute an enemy. This is helpful in clearing trash pulls, keeping your sustain up. For our Pressure Points passive, we're getting extra spell crit for having Assassination ability slotted. So on our front bar, we have 2 of those. We have our Execute and our Ultimate. And then Hemorrhage, this is where I talked about Magicka Nightblades get bonus critical damage. So we get that 10% bonus, but only when an Assassination ability is slotted. So you need to make sure you have one of those on both bars. For this reason, I'm running Merciless Resolve on the back bar. That is an Assassination ability. That's the only way that we're getting that passive to happen on our back bar. Front bar is no problem because we have those 2 abilities like I mentioned. Shadow, these are interesting. These are more of like our recovery and survivability. So Refreshing Shadows, you get 15% health, stamina, Magicka, just for doing nothing basically. This is a great passive. Shadow Barrier, this gives you Major Resolve and Major Ward for 6 seconds when you're casting a Shadow ability. So for Shadow Barrier, this gives us Major Resolve and Major Ward for 6 seconds. This is our Major Armor buff. It also goes up for each piece of heavy armor. So I'm getting that boosted twice up to 9 seconds. Now the way that you're getting this is it lines up really nicely with your Twisting Path. Twisting Path is about 10-11 seconds. We're getting Major Ward and Major Resolve for 9 seconds. So basically you want to recast this about every 9 seconds to make sure your defensive buffs are up. Dark Vigor, I mentioned this earlier. This gives us an extra bonus health on each bar where we have a shadow ability slotted. Now for this reason, I'm using 2 shadow abilities and I like to have 1 on each bar. This means my health pool is not fluctuating up and down depending on what bar I am. It's always going to be the same because on my front bar I have Dark Shade and on my back bar I have Twisting Path. You can swap those around obviously, but I do recommend having 1 on each bar. Try to balance it if you can. And then Dark Veil, this just increases our durations by 2 seconds for shadow abilities. Siphoning, we have some really important passives here in the Siphoning tree. Catalyst gives you 20 ultimate after using a potion. Make sure you're using potions on cooldown. Magicka Flood is probably one of the most important passives Nightblades get. You get 8% max Magicka while a Siphoning ability is slotted. That's just one on each bar. So on our front bar, I have 2. I have Swallow Soul and Sap Essence. And on the back, I also have, I believe, 2. I think this counts for 1. So 1, 2, 3. So you'll have plenty of siphoning abilities. Just make sure you have 1 active on both bars. Soul Siphoner increases healing done. This is great for soloing. It makes those heals that are coming in over time even stronger. And then Transfer. We're getting this a lot from both Sap Essence and Swallow Soul. We get 2 ultimate every 4 seconds as long as you're using those abilities, and we will be for sure. We're using double Destro, so all you need is Destro staff passives here. Light armor, you want all of these. Heavy armor, you will want the first 3. This gives us some extra health recovery, physical and spell resistance, things like that. If you're running 511, you can use medium armor passives as well. Vampire passives, you are getting your extra Magicka and stamina recovery here. You're also getting the Undeath passive, which gives you a nice bit of tankiness. Fighter's Guild, you want Banish the Wicked. Mage's Guild, all of these. Sigic Order is not really necessary on this build. You can use things like Channeled Acceleration if you want, but I just had a hard time fitting that into the build, so I kind of skipped this overall. Max level Undaunted, and then obviously you want all your racial passives, and Alchemy, Medicinal Use just makes your potions last longer. Definitely pick that up. All right, let's jump into champion points. Definitely important on the build. 31 Warlord, 16 into Sprinter. Tenacity, I put nothing. I don't really need to do heavy attacks with the Breton Sustain, with the other things like Minor Magicka Steel that we have on the build. 100 into Arcanist because why the heck not? 43 into Mooncalf. Stamina recovery is definitely helpful. 48 Shadow Ward. 31 into Tumbling. You could actually put more into Shadow Ward, I think, on a solo build. It will be more helpful than like a DPS setup. So you could actually take some out of Arcanist and put more into Shadow Ward. In the blue tree, we've got 19 into Blessed, 28 Elfborn, 56 Elemental Defender, 36 into Spell Erosion, 19 Staff Expert, 56 Master at Arms, 56 into Thaumaturge. If you are doing DPS in a group, you'll want to get more here for the Exploiter passive. You want at least 75, and so for that you can pull in points from your other nodes just to get that up. So you get the extra 10% off balance damage. But for soloing, we don't really use off balance. Ironclad 56. Hardy and Elemental Defender, I've got 49 there, 26 into Thick Skinned, 15 into Light Armor, just gives us a little bit extra physical resistance, which is nice. 19 Quick Recovery, and then 56 into Bastion. Forgot to mention this in the gear, but both our Ice Heart and our infused damage shield glyph actually get boosted by Bastion by quite a bit. Those two gear set items are not capped by health. So usually Bastion is kind of like a useless CP node. You want to pump this up as much as possible if you're doing an Ice Heart build. I think at base, Ice Heart is like a 7 or 8k damage shield, and this brings it up to close to 10k. So definitely pump that up if you're using Ice Heart. All right, everybody, that's going to wrap it up for this solo PvE Magicka Nightblade. I hope you enjoyed it. I have definitely enjoyed playing it just in the first couple days of Elsweyr. So it's a really strong build. Remember to crush that like button for me if you liked what you saw here. Also, leave me a comment below and let me know what you think of the Magicka Nightblade this patch. And I've got a lot more build videos for Elsweyr coming out very soon, so stay tuned for those. And until then, I appreciate you guys so much. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you around in the next video. Thanks.